Hello there, Tando Book Club lovers. This season, we're putting the books written by your favorite African female authors center stage. Joining me in the studio is the fabulous and amazing book reviewer Sarah Nyengerai as our co-host for this season. As is our custom, we always begin every episode with a quote from a famous African that we believe captures the spirit and message of our book discussion for the day. Naturally, we're choosing quotes from the books we're talking about in this season. Today's quote is, "Weakness is treating someone as though they belong to you. Strength is knowing that everyone belongs to themselves." Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. So Sarah, tell us what you find most interesting about Yaa Gyasi as an author.
Thank you, Selina. Homegoing is historical fiction, and that's the one thing that I found stands out about the book. It is fictional, but from reading it, she teaches us history. There is a lot of stories, there's a lot of information that I learned that I did not know about because I did not do African history in my formative years for O-level or for A-level. It was centered around European history. So there are things I learned about the Atlantic trans-slavery period that I'd never known about. More importantly, our role in fast-tracking slavery. I always felt it was a case of they came, they took, but it was facilitated by our very own and perhaps lasted longer because of our participation in the process.
Very good, very profound. So Homegoing basically is a book that is about slavery, but it's told through a pair of twins, Esi and Effia. Effia is a girl sold by her father to a white man as a bride, and her half-sister Esi is captured and enslaved sometime in the 18th century. And the story is narrated by the families or the descendants of these two girls throughout history until we get to modern day. So what were your overall impressions of the book?
I loved it. Brilliant book. Totally worth it if you want to understand our part in slavery. And just to see the full circle journey from plantations to Mississippi, and then some migrate on to Britain, and then back again with several generations later back on the coast of where it all started. So it's almost like a healing journey where through descendants, the story comes full circle. So I think she did a brilliant job in that regard. And it was a learning experience for me, like I said earlier.
Definitely. I learned a lot also about history through the book. I was also struck by the role that Africans played, the internal slave trade. Very, very interesting. And it made me think that when we talk about history and we talk about oppression and oppression from one race over another and things like the slave trade, would it have been different if blacks were the oppressors and whites were the slaves? And I always wonder about that because when I look at Femi, for instance, one of the girl's brothers and his role and how, like, you know, the ones that get to stay, their role in perpetrating that, it's very, very interesting that there are no victims or villains. So I find that very, very powerful and so very, very interesting. The other thing that I also find very interesting, and that was I wondered about and was part of my impressions of the book, was Yaa Gyasi herself. She is Ghanaian. She is a descendant, of a similar kind of story. And in her personal story, she actually returned to Ghana, much like one of the characters in the modern day story. So I wondered if there was a biographical element to that. What I found most impressive is that for a first novel, she packed so much richness in terms of history. I'm like, she must have researched the hell out of that. And also so much richness in terms of storytelling, because each character came to center stage as their own person. And, they just did the hell out of their story, whether they were sympathetic or not sympathetic. But we're running out of time. We're about to move to our next segment. So we'll be back in just a few minutes to keep talking Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. But until then, stay tuned. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching the Tando Book Club, and we're discussing Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi with my fabulous co-host, Sarah Nyengerai. So Sarah, one of the questions I love to ask when we're doing these book reviews is or rather, who were your favorite characters and your least favorite characters? And this is a tricky one because there must be, like when you look at the whole family tree of the descendants of these two women, there must be easily a good 20, 30, people to pick from. But any favorites and any not so favorites?
Unlike books we've discussed before, I don't have one particular favorite. The characters are many, and she did justice to each. They're so rich. But I would pick Marjorie. Because there is that saying, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. And I feel Marjorie resembles that. The hope that her ancestors had, that surely our descendants will have it better. That as you're going over the seas, some are jumping off, some are in a new land, you are rejecting your customs. You're forced to deny your names. Marjorie brings that back. She's like recompense in her search for the African identity, in wanting to marry the two, her past and who she is as an American. So she makes for a happy ending.
Yeah, I do think Marjorie does make for a happy ending, especially because when I look at the branch of the family that was in the Americas and who were on the plantations. And like there are at least 3 or 4 stories or 3 or 4 generations of them just trying to get out of this thing called slavery. And that, I think, was very moving for me because it showed me how some things in a family line can take a really long time to work themselves out of a family. And, I just couldn't help but feel for those generations, like looking for a place of belonging, a place to call home, but having been ripped away so forcefully from that home, because also the earlier pictures of, being trapped in the castle, in the dungeons. And I thought that Yaa Gyasi did a very good job of that, where the one sister is upstairs enjoying this life of being the lover of this military man, and then the other sister is packed in these dungeons downstairs. And, there's rape, there's like the filth, of their mess. And she uses this phrase, the river of tears. And also the how people start out crying and then eventually the tears just become silent and there's this sad silence. So she really put a face on the slave trade for me. And I really appreciate that. And I'm glad she did that because, it spans 200 years, the period of slave trade in history. And people act like it just happened like this. But think of all of those families, think of all of that trauma and all of that just trying and grasping and wanting to be free. What were some of the key life lessons for you?
I think I have 2. The first one is our history is important. And I'll go back to the fact that I said I did not do African history. It wasn't part of the syllabus. It was European history, which in of itself is significant. But I was saddened that I wasn't taught about Amistad. I wasn't taught about the slave trade. And here I have a novel that's helping me learn more and our involvement. The other one was in as much as they had escaped certain plantations, were now in the States and creating lives for themselves. One wife says to the husband, we cannot go back. There is no going back because this is home for us now. So you have the husband still wanting to go back, and then the wife saying, we can never go back. And they don't even know where back is. It could have felt like it was just next door, but it wasn't. And there's laying to rest of what could have been and embracing what's now.
I love that, definitely. And I do think loss is generally twofold. You must grieve what was, and then you are also grieving what can no longer be. You know, and it's confusing because you know, you have no guarantee that it could have been the way that you imagine the future, but isn't it, it's the death of a dream, isn't it always? So that's very, very powerful and a very profound life lesson that you picked up. Just embracing also the present, accepting where you are and, you know, letting the chips fall where they may. We've come to the end of our second segment, but we'll be right back in a few moments, and we are looking forward to reconnecting with you as we talk Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. When we get back, we'll be doing our usual reading from the book, and we'll be talking about what we found uniquely strong about this story. So you don't want to miss this. Welcome back. You're watching the Tando Book Club, and we're discussing Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. So Sarah, before we went to break, you were making a very important point about embracing the present. And for me, it really highlighted the two-sided coin of loss. We grieve for what was, and then we grieve for what can never be. And in that is the grieving over the death of a dream. And it's not necessarily to say that the dream would have come to pass the way we imagine it, but really, it's, I think, the indignity of having your dream taken away from you. And especially, I think, when we look at the slave trade, there was a very visceral, violent robbing of those dreams. What would you say was the unique strength of the book for you?
Historical fiction is one. She did her research, so it's not just a story I'm making up. She did her research and then gave character to the research. Her portrayal of the slave trade is unflinching. From the shores in Ghana to America. And with each character, you get an appreciation of why the people are like that. You also get an appreciation of why America is the way it is. Some of the struggles that we see or hear of in America today, as you read this book, you are like, oh, okay, so this is where it comes from. The punitive measures given to a black criminal or someone who commits a crime are higher, and in terms of the fine paid. So this translates into even prison sentences today. So she's unflinching in just presenting our history and how it brings us to where we are today. So she enlightens readers on an event that changed not just Africa, but America in of itself.
Yeah, definitely, and shaped it for what it is today, because within that, when you're talking especially about, you know, the history of incarcerating blacks, you know, bigger fines, longer prison sentences, you know, and it's all a mutually reinforcing cycle with other things that we then see, the social trends around drug abuse, that's also in the story, and, you know, mental health issues, that's also in this book, you know, and depression, all of those really, really huge societal, you know, things are rooted in some of these injustices that were never redressed, even up until now, not faithfully and not sincerely. Very powerful. So usually at this point in the show, we like to do a reading from the book. And because we couldn't get Yaa Gyasi to come and discuss the book with us, I'm going to make Sarah read it like I always do. So Sarah.
Thank you. Okay. This is Effia, one of the characters. Am I wicked? The fetish man asked, and Effia did not know how to answer. That first day she had met him, when he had given her the kola nut, the missionary had come out and seen her with him. He had snatched her hand and pulled her away and told her not to talk to fetish men. They called him a fetish man because he was, one, because he had not given up praying to the ancestors, or dancing or collecting plants and rocks and bones and blood, with which he used to make fetish offerings. He had not been baptized. That made him fetish. She knew he was supposed to be wicked, that she would be in a sea of trouble if the missionaries knew that she still went to see the fetish man. And yet, she recognized that his kindness, his love, was different from the people at the school, warmer and truer somehow.
Thank you, Sarah. Lovely reading. And I love the piece that you chose because it intersected many different points in history. Love that. Well, it's been another great edition of the Book Club as we've talked Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. See you again next week, same time, as we celebrate another fabulous African female author. Until then, stay safe, stay strong, and stay true. And stay drinking wine. Goodbye.
Americana is loved by many because at the crux of it, it is a love story.
What I love about the book for me is the point of view of the narrative point of view. You really get sort of captivated by the internal world of the characters.
I haven't read a book that depicts migration and what people go through when they migrate. People in this case being when Africans go overseas. She brought it all to light. And I read it at a time when a lot of Zimbabweans were migrating and to America, to the United Kingdom. And if you want to understand the migration experience from a personal and economic level, this is the book.